What do the movie Titanic, the video game Super Mario 64, and the animated film Rise of the Guardians have in common? Hypothermia. Recently, I picked up Super Mario 3D All-Stars for the Nintendo Switch, and by recently I mean 4 years ago. I originally bought it for Mario 64 in particular, so I could understand why people prefer the N64 version over the Nintendo DS version, the version I grew up playing. As I was going through the motions, trying to get used to the controls, man, they're really finicky in this version, I eventually stumbled into Snowman's Land, one of my favorite levels from when I was younger. What can I say? I really liked the igloo level in that game, I'm sorry. Not as big of a fan of it here, but nonetheless, one aspect of this land that can be really frustrating when you're the player is the cold water that you can't swim through without losing health. Luckily, it's somewhat avoidable, though it can be quite easy to get pushed into. During these moments, I sat there and I had a thought. Okay, maybe that's a misrepresentation. I always have several thoughts, but this one was nagging at me. We know that Mario loses health when he swims in this ridiculously cold water. Let's see how long it takes for Mario to lose a life in this cold water when he's just sitting still for a little bit. Well, that didn't take long. That was roughly 22 seconds. That's when it hit me. How realistic is this? That Mario would just, well, lose a life so quickly due to the cold water? You can probably guess what happened next. Yep, you guessed it. That pesky meteorology brain of mine started to dive into the problem head first. Though I assure you, I didn't dive into any cold water to solve this problem. That would have been disastrous for, well, everyone involved. Let's talk about what causes hypothermia. Firstly, what is hypothermia? Simply put, it's when the human body loses heat more quickly than it can produce it. The good news is that most water that Mario is swimming in won't cause this to happen to him. How do we know that? Well, he doesn't really lose health in any other water, for one thing. Temperature-wise, for Mario to experience hypothermia at all, let's say our water temperature is about 26.5 degrees Celsius, or 80 degrees Fahrenheit if you're in the United States, because for some reason we don't use Celsius. I really can't explain that one, I'm sorry, people. So say we're in water that's that warm of a temperature, it's extremely unlikely he'll develop hypothermia. He might temporarily lose his dexterity if he doesn't exit the water for an extended period of time, but that's pretty much it. And keep in mind, it would take several hours for him to reach that state. Now, while we don't know the water is, well, 26.5 degrees Celsius when he's swimming around in the game, we can infer he's swimming in relatively warmer water since he's not losing health by simply swimming. For example, swimming around to Jolly Roger Bay doesn't result in Mario losing health even when diving to the deepest depths of the bay. That doesn't mean he's safe from hypothermia on this level, though, at least not according to science. Here's a fun fact for you. Humans can develop hypothermia in warmer waters. Granted, we won't develop it quickly. Assuming water is in Jolly Roger Bay and various other water levels like Dire Docks and Wet Dry World and any other areas that may have water that I'm forgetting about at this moment are 21 to 26.5 degrees Celsius or 70 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit, it will take 1 to 2 hours to start losing dexterity, anywhere from 2 to 12 hours to potentially become exhausted and lose consciousness, and you can potentially lose your life at 3 hours or longer in waters of these temperatures. Now, keep in mind that's a relatively low chance. Even if a person does not start feeling these effects, say for loss of life that's pretty immediate, they will be mild, with people experiencing very few problems. If a person is moving around in water this warm, it's even more unlikely they'll suffer any negative consequences. I don't think you need me to tell you that the water Mario's dealing with when it comes to Snowman's Land is decidedly not warm given how quickly he loses a life shortly after entering it. Since we're likely dealing with really cold water, this should be easy. We just need to find out what's considered to be cold water for humans to be swimming in. As soon as we have that, our answer will come easily. Did my tone give away that this is decidedly not that simple? Water is considered cold if it's less than 21 degrees Celsius or 70 degrees Fahrenheit. That's cold for water's standards, yes, but not cold enough to cause Mario to lose a life in a matter of literal seconds. So we have to ask ourselves the question, how cold does water have to be for Mario to completely lose a life? I started my investigation by going to the most extreme possibility. What's the absolute coldest the temperature of the water could be before it becomes ice? In other words, we need to determine what the freezing and melting points of water are. As their names imply, freezing point is the temperature of which water freezes, and melting point is the temperature of which ice melts. Luckily, freezing and melting point are the same temperature for water. It has to be at 0 degrees Celsius or 32 degrees Fahrenheit if you're in the United States for it to melt or freeze. If we have water existing at 0 degrees, it either has just started freezing or just finished melting in the water. You may be asking why. Well, from 8th grade science, at least for me it was 8th grade, I won't speak for the rest of you. This is because during a phase change, the temperature of an object remains the same until the change is complete. If Snowman's land has the same rules, then this water must be above 0 degrees Celsius or 32 degrees Fahrenheit in order to remain a liquid. In order to be water, it has to be above these temperatures. If we infer that the water Mario's swimming in is close to freezing and melting point, but not quite there, we'll use the numbers that are closest to freezing and melting point. 0.3 Celsius or 32.5 degrees Fahrenheit. These numbers come from aceboater.com, musickayak.org, and various other websites. Yes, a lot of these websites are about boating. If anyone's most at risk for hypothermia, it's likely those that are taking boats out onto open water, not your average family going to the beach. Now, why is that? Well, boaters tend to just boat, regardless of what the water temperature is. Most families aren't going swimming in water unless it's hot enough outside. They're decidedly not going swimming in pools of water like Snowman Land. That would be a little weird. I don't know about you, but I would not be swimming in Snowman's Land. So, without wearing the proper protective gear, Mario would lose dexterity in his limbs in less than 2 minutes. It would take less than 15 minutes for him to lose consciousness. His expected time of survival would be at maximum 45 minutes, but it could be as short as less than 15 minutes. I hope it goes without saying that if Mario wore the proper protective gear, he would be more likely to survive cold water. Since that shirt and overalls are not secretly a dry suit with fleece layers, he's at a disadvantage, hence his losing a life. His survivability is low in his current attire. Yet, even with waters this cold, is it truly possible for Mario to lose a life after a matter of seconds? I'm going to go out on a limb and say probably not, but it's not entirely impossible. I'll give it a solid maybe. Here's why I say that. Given that hypothermia is when a person loses more heat than them generating it, there may be a difference between how long a person can live for if they're moving versus if they remain still. Given multiple accounts out there, it's likely that this is true in real life, but what about in Mario 64? Well, the good news is, we could check that for ourselves. How? Well, by looking at Mario's life meter. How fast does it decrease when he's still versus when he's moving along, actively swimming in these waters? If he's actively swimming in this cold of water, he's more likely to experience symptoms of hypothermia more quickly. Well, theoretically, that's how it would work in real life. Now, if you know anything about exercise, it's that it does warm the body up. That is very true. The body will generate heat if a person undergoes physical activity, especially strenuous physical activity. However, when humans are submerged in temperatures that are near freezing, even the heat that would normally be generated via exercise is not going to be enough to stop the effects of the cold water. Heat from the body will be lost more quickly than it's gained. In water this cold, it may be better to stay still than to move. Then at least the body heat Mario does have can be held for slightly longer. This is typically how it works in the real world. So let's do a quick comparison check. Is there a difference in Mario's health meter if he swims versus if he remains still? I took a recording of times when Mario remains still versus when he moves. Let's take a look and see what happens. Well, that was anticlimactic. It was about the same amount of time for him to lose a life. However, I'm not going to give the developers flack for this one. Honestly, it's really impressive that the developers at Nintendo thought to include hypothermia at all. Given that this is the N64 era and the first ever 3D Mario game, I wouldn't have expected this detail to be in there, but it is. To tell you the truth, I'm honestly floored that Nintendo would include this in their first ever 3D Mario game. This is the level of detail I've come to expect from them in all of their video games, especially nowadays, but this is the reason why I expect that. They included something that they didn't necessarily have to. The game would have been complete without this factor in it. But they chose to include it anyway. So Nintendo, even though it's not entirely accurate, as a person is unlikely to lose their life in literal seconds, I have to give my hats off to you on this one. Don't get me wrong. If I wanted to be nitpicky about this, I absolutely could be. I'm a meteorologist, a scientist if you will. I do nitpicky things on a daily basis. However, I'm just happy that Nintendo programmed this in their game at all. To me, that's a massive win. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe, as it shows YouTube that this content's worth watching, and I really want to share this with the rest of the world. I'm grateful to all of you that have supported me so far, and I look forward to making more videos like this in the future. I'll see you all in the next one. Have a good day.